Good morning. Good April 1st morning to everybody. As we record this, it is the morning of April the 1st. It's a nice spring day outside, a little cloudy, but otherwise nice. And I'm here with congressional candidate for the 9th CD, Nick Alex. Mr. Alex, good morning. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Good to be with you
Uh,
this morning.
well, thank you, Nick, for joining us. And you are running for Congress in the 9th CD, and which is it's great. And have you doing that? It seems to be a crowded field though, on both sides. There's contested primaries on both sides this year, so that's good. And so I'm going to do what I typically do in these interviews. And at the beginning, I turn it over to the candidate to let you introduce yourself to everybody, give you just your personal background, whatever you think is relevant, and then we'll go from there. So go ahead, and the video, the camera is yours. So go ahead.
Okay. Well, just to give you some background on me, I'm what I call a citizen candidate. So this is my first run for office. Although I've been running now for a year. We're into the month of April. We started in April of 2025, right?
Mhm.
And so I've learned a lot about the political process and CD9 traveling throughout the district. But
Right.
as I say, I started out as a citizen candidate. I retired from a career in finance and technology in 2024. The election happened. I was in a kind of a fog afterwards, unhappy with the result in November of 2024, like a lot of people. And my way of coping was to start to work with the local Democratic Party in Rabun County. I live in Clayton. And as I started to look at the numbers in Rabun County, I realized that there was a path to victory. Analytically, I looked at the numbers and I realized there was a path to victory. And I can talk more about that later. But as I've gotten into it, I've realized that somebody with my kind of experience, my work experience and my life experience, uh, running a relatively flawless campaign, had a shot at winning the ninth district and sending Andrew Clyde into retirement. So uh, and on the personal side, it kind of became a method of service to me. Both my parents worked for the federal government. I grew up in the Washington D.C. area, Northern Virginia. Um, my father actually served in both Korea and Vietnam. My mother worked for the Department of Defense. And so I felt I was blessed when I retired and had the ability to do something more. And I decided I wanted to help Andrew Clyde retire. So that's kind of my so that path to victory, along with my commitment to serve, and then to have the life experience and work experience to be able to go to Washington and actually get something done for the ninth district, just became compelling to me, and it's become a calling for me.
Well, thank you. You mentioned that, I get this all the time. I live over here in the 14th CD, and it's a very conservative district, and we're in the middle of a contested runoff right now that's going down to the wire. So it is possible, certainly, for these more conservative congressional districts to move in a Democratic direction. We're seeing that here. What are you seeing over there in the ninth? That kind of just some stuff that you think is leading you. I think you call it a path to victory. What are you
Yeah,
seeing there that leads you to believe that?
good question. In the data that I have reviewed, it shows that in round numbers, there were 500 in 2024. There were 565,000 registered voters in the
Mhm.
ninth district, and 165,000 of those did not vote. So 165,000 registered voters didn't vote in 2024, and we have calculated that if we can get a particular share of that, I don't want to give away all my secrets
Oh yeah,
here,
that's fine. That's fine. Yeah.
but there's we know by buying the state data, we bought the state vote builder data, which
Hmm.
allows us to pinpoint our efforts. But by looking at that, we can tell how to actually pursue those 165,000 votes that didn't get cast in 2024, and uh, find independent voters who maybe are having some regrets over perhaps voting for Clyde and Trump, and even
Mhm.
some disaffected Republicans. Tom, I have more and more voters come up to me after each one of my events now and tell me they used to be a Republican, but the party moved away from them and they
Right.
stayed right where they were. And now they were looking for an alternative. So I'm what I call an inclusive Democrat. I'm somewhat progressive, but I go all the way to a kind of left of center centrist as a Democrat.
Mhm.
So I believe in things like right to bear arms, strong borders, even a balanced budget. But so I like to think I can appeal to, because those are my views. I can appeal to independent voters and maybe even former Republicans, and that's the coalition I want to build. So I found that there is actually that available population of that 165,000 I mentioned, and then in places like North Gwinnett and in Gainesville or Hall County, we're finding a lot of these folks who are on the fence now and are willing to listen to different arguments. So anyway, all that builds that coalition of we I think we'll get all the Democrats. I think we'll get a lot of the independents, and we are starting to find a population of kind of regretting or reluctant Republicans who don't want to have Trump and Clyde in power for another 2 years.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. That's an interesting take on the district and what's going on there. We are seeing some of that same stuff here, where a lot of Republicans are either. I think a lot of them are some of them are moving, some of them are maybe just staying home. They're a little bit discouraged, and so I think that is opening up pathways for us. So good luck on getting those. The more we can get of them, the better off we all are here in the North Georgia. Besides the sort of numbers and that angle of it, if you are elected to Congress, what would be some of your top two, three, four legislative objectives that you would pursue as a member of Congress?
Sure, and this somewhat ties to the committees I'd like to be a part of too, which I know you
Yeah,
probably have.
you can do both of those at the same time, I
Okay,
guess.
okay. Yeah, the first and foremost, which unfortunately is kind of epidemic across the district, is affordability. And in affordability, I want to be very specific that I'm talking about things like food, housing, energy, and even healthcare. Uh, so from a food and housing perspective, we've got to take tariffs and taxation back to the U.S. House of Representatives. The current class, including Andrew Clyde, especially Andrew Clyde, have abdicated responsibility for tariffs and taxation. The Supreme Court recently sort of bailed them out, right, and said that
Right.
yes, in the Constitution, the power to tax and tariff is the right of the House of Representatives. But of course, he's then put on these generic 15% tariffs just because he
Right.
can. So we're going to need to continue to fight and take back all that financial policy, which is where my background in finance really helps. I think things like the SNAP program and USAID programs need to be restored. They were very beneficial to our farmers and therefore the food supply. I have a lot of concern about the affordability of our food supply. And
Mhm.
with the recent cost of oil and gas because of the Iran war, that's going to become even more difficult. Um, in terms of housing, I'd like to support John Ossoff and he's trying to get passed a bill called the 21st Century Road to Housing Act,
Right.
and there's different versions that are being debated in the two different houses of Congress, but we've got to get that over the line, and that will help us with things like zoning reform and financing buyers and builders in terms of
Mhm.
getting more affordable housing built. That is a big issue. There's a lot of folks, Tom, who can't stay in the district that I see them grow up in. And, I've talked to many families in Gwinnett, North Gwinnett, who said their kids graduate from college and can't stay in Gwinnett. They've got to go move to someplace cheaper because they can't afford the rents or the housing costs in North Gwinnett, and the same
Right.
is becoming true in Hall. So anyway, affordability is a huge issue, and um, you know, as far as I'm concerned, Andrew Clyde and Donald Trump have done nothing for that. And if anything, they made it worse, as we've seen the spiral in gas prices.
Right.
In terms of this, so that's one big area. The other big area is government services. Um, I've been tracking it since the beginning. The impact of the ACA subsidy cut for 2020, well, for the One Big Beautiful Bill in 2025 is just now starting to really take effect. There are almost 300,000 Georgians who have dropped Affordable Care Act and health insurance year over
Yeah.
year right now. So those are all new uninsured folks who are going to either have health issues or are going to go to our emergency rooms. We have got to restore ACA subsidies. We're about to get hit with something called Medicaid cuts. And those are related to work requirements and paperwork and other trips, trying to actually kick people out of the Medicaid program. It's built
Right.
into the economics of that. So that's a problem. I'd like to see us restore those ACA subsidies, Medicaid cuts, and SNAP benefits for nutrition. But I'd really ultimately like to be a part of a solution that would get us to Medicare or single payer healthcare, because I just really believe there's no way we can have insurance companies and private sector competing in a for-profit model to provide low-cost healthcare for everyone. So I ultimately would like to see us get to some kind of single payer system. That the third and final area of legislation that I want to focus on is rule of law, and in particular, comprehensive immigration enforcement reform. We've got to get ICE and DHS back into their original box. They had a role before this administration blasted it out of familiarity.
Yeah.
It needs to be put back, and then we need to have a path to citizenship. We aren't going to. I cannot imagine that the heart of this country, the soul of these people in the ninth district, would support trying to export 10 million people from the United States. We certainly need to get the criminals, the actual criminals who are convicted either in their home country or here of something other than immigration issues,
Right.
and and we need to get those folks out of the country. But that is a vast minority of the immigrant population, and we need to then find a path to citizenship for the rest. So I can't believe that even though they're trying to build an Oakwood detention center, right, and Social Circle has a big, detention center being proposed. I can't believe we're going to use these facilities around the country to move 10 million people out of the United States and tear their families apart.
Yeah.
Nor is it good for our economy. So that's a big issue in rule of law. The other is War Powers Act. I cannot stomach any longer the behavior of Trump and this administration, with full support of Andrew Clyde, around taking a dictator out in Venezuela with no authorization, the bombing of or destroying of boats in the Gulf of Mexico, just extrajudicial killings in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico with no real proof of what who's being killed and what they were guilty of, and
Mm-hmm.
then the Iran war, along with then abdicating responsibility for Ukraine. So we need to take back rule of law and the War Powers Act and get our military commitments restructured along the lines of what I think the people of the Ninth District want, which is get out of Iran, get out of Venezuela, finish Ukraine against the Russian antagonists.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, those are and to do that, I would like to be on the oversight committee, because I believe that the agencies that are headed up by a gang of fools in Washington right now are need to have oversight again. I'd love to be part of an oversight committee that has real teeth and has hearings and brings in agency heads and their deputies, and we actually hold them accountable. None of that's going on right now. So I'd like to be on the Oversight Committee. I'd also like to be on the Appropriations Committee, in order to, literally put our money where our mouth is again, and not where, the gold-plated, gold, uh, fetish of Trump wants it to be. We
Right.
need to be, spending money for, our working people, and providing health care, providing food support. We used to do humanitarian aid. We used to take in, through an asylum process. We used to bring in a certain number of immigrants from a variety of countries, who were, either politically challenged or economically challenged. So those things are where the appropriations and the budget of the United States need to be geared, not toward the latest, you know, Pete Hegseth nightmare drama. Anyway, sorry, I went off on a little bit of a rant.
No, that's fine. That's fine. You answered several things, which is good. Let me just go ahead and continue along the line. There's a couple things I still want to talk about as far as like constituency outreach. That's always an issue. It seems to always be an issue. If you were elected, where would you have offices across the ninth? Where do you think it would be? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I would definitely have an office. Although my car would be my best office. I've
Yeah.
since I mentioned to you, I started this campaign a year ago, and I've now driven about 8,000 miles across the district. If you think about, if you've looked at it on a map, the ninth district is quite the gerrymander example, right? If you looked
Yeah.
it up in the dictionary, although the
Right.
14th is pretty bad too, but
Yeah. There's a lot of them. Yeah.
there's a lot
Yeah.
of them. And
Yeah.
this one, as you know, goes from North Gwinnett up through Hall County. It has Banks, Habersham, Rabun, uh, you know, White County, goes across the top of the state in the middle, in terms of Towns County, Union County, then Fannin down to Gilmer. Anyway,
Right.
I've traveled 8,000 miles. I've done about 80 different speaking events and listening tour events in those areas. I really enjoy that part of it almost more than anything, and it's what really has fired me up, to continue this campaign for now a year in the making. So I would myself on the road, even like right now when Congress is in recess. We can't find Clyde, right? We've tried to go up to his office and find him, and he's got an office in Gainesville. I think the
Mm.
office. I think I'd have an office, and I'd certainly post my office time and office hours. But I'd also like to be on the road. I know that's not popular anymore because a couple of Republicans have gotten really hammered. I was thinking of the Rich McCormick town hall last year where he really got hammered, but I frankly think he deserved it. But
Right.
whether he did or he didn't, the people have a right to talk to their congressman. We've asked Andrew Clyde why he won't do a town hall or a debate, and he said he thinks it's too inefficient to talk to a group of people in person. He thinks he can be more efficient if he does it, over a Zoom meeting. And there's a place for Zoom, but it's not in place of talking to your constituents. So I'd have an
Right.
office. I'd have an office either in Sewanee, probably in North Gwinnett, or in Gainesville in Hall County. Um, and I'm not experienced enough to know whether or not I can afford two yet. But if I did,
Yeah.
I'd probably have both of those. That's where the real population centers are of this district. Jackson
Hmm.
County being the third largest, but it's North Gwinnett and Hall County first, and then maybe Jackson County, and then the other counties I would just travel to, and I have been, as I say, over the last year.
Good. Thank you for that. And you're right. The ninth CD, North Georgia in general is not an easy place to travel. The roads mostly go east-west and across mountains, and so yeah, it's difficult. And Northeast Georgia is even more so, I think, than Northwest Georgia is.
Yeah,
Going back to issues just for a second, we covered a lot of ground on stuff like Ukraine and Iran and Venezuela. You have strong stances against what's going on in all of those areas. Going to more of a domestic issue, and you talked about health issues. What about women's health? What do you think should happen on the reproductive front there?
yeah. And let me just go back and make sure I said this correctly, that I said this correctly. But on Ukraine, I'd like to see us finish that war.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and I think Trump has taken his eye off of it because it's against his buddy Putin,
Yeah.
and I'm disgusted with the way he's let it languish now and be the responsibility of Europe alone. But anyway, yeah. So here's what I would immediately want to be a part of is either co-sponsor or sponsor national legislation to restore women's reproductive rights to Roe standards. Right. I think
Hmm.
it may have been what you were alluding to. Um,
Right.
I think part of the problem with the original decision of Roe v. Wade was that it was contrived by the Supreme Court, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but I mean it was used by a particular situation was used by the Supreme Court to establish women's reproductive rights, and then because it wasn't passed legislation per
Hmm.
se, it was able to be picked apart, by subsequent Supreme Courts. So what I'd like to see is national legislation that is crystal clear, black and white, that restores women's reproductive rights to a Roe standard, ROE standard, obviously,
Hmm.
and that would become the law of the land, and we wouldn't have these. We shouldn't have. This isn't a topic that can be debated state by state and region by region. For women who are working here or get transferred here from another state, let's say you're working in New York and you get transferred to Georgia, you shouldn't lose rights over your reproductive health, right? And so I would like to see that become national legislation and therefore become law of the land. I'd love to see it enshrined in the Constitution if that could happen, but that's a much higher standard, as you know. But I
Yeah.
would,
Yeah.
at a minimum, like to see it be national legislation.
Okay. Well, thank you. We've pretty much covered the major topics of the day and your approach to campaigning and all that. And what I'd like to do is as we sort of wrap things up here, I always give the candidate at the end a chance to sort of look in the camera and then just give your, I guess you could say, your stump speech, your 1 to 2 minute argument about why the voters of the Ninth CD should vote for Nick Alex as the next member of Congress for them. So I'm going to let you do that as we close out here.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for talking with me this morning and giving me a chance to weigh in on my political views and
Right.
aspirations. My my proposition is that I'm an experienced candidate, and I believe in this day and age, experience matters. And what I mean by that is, I have the career experience, having worked for large and small institutions, having worked for large companies and small businesses. That I have the kind of experience it takes to go to Washington and work with that 435 member House of Representatives and get stuff done. I'd love to partner with Senator Ossoff and Warnock and get things done with them. And I know how to do that in a large political organization like Bank of America, believe it or not. So I have that experience of a career that led to me leading a global group of 500 people at one point. And I was actually in charge of this large group at Bank of America during 9/11 and actually led the banking industry out of some problems we had because after the planes stopped flying and the crashes occurred in downtown New York, we literally had to help a lot of banks get back up and running. And I had to make sure that Bank of America could function as a payment organization. That was my part of the business. So I led through that and had the kind of career experience that I think would be very commendable or compatible with what the House of Representatives needs. And then finally, I have the life experiences to be a good House of Representative member. I'm a husband of 44 years. I married my high school sweetheart, who's actually my guiding light. I've raised two daughters, one of which was biological, the other who was adopted from Russia. And that's a whole nother video we could do sometime, Tom. But I went to Russia in the middle of, the kind of democratization of Russia, going to
Right.
from communism to, eventually to Putin.
Yeah.
In the middle of that, I went and adopted a little baby from an orphanage in Russia and had that experience of raising two daughters. And now having, four grandsons. So, have the life experiences and the work experiences that I think will make me a great leader in the district and a great leader in Congress for CD9.
Okay, well, Nick, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. You got a lot of ideas that I hope one day that you can put into real effect. Best of luck to you on the campaign trail coming up. There, you got May 19th primary, and then on to November if you win that. So good luck to you, and thank you so much. And just again, thank you so much for running. I always say this: stepping out to run on the big stage is a lot harder than most people even think it is. And I always appreciate anybody who does it. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.
And can I mention if
Yeah, go
anybody
ahead.
has any follow-up questions, they can find me at nickalex2026.com.
Okay, so Nick Alex says the numbers 2026.com.
That's
That's
right.
your website. Oh, okay. And you have an ActBlue account there linked and everything too, right?
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. All right, Nick. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Good meeting you.